Hello, I'm Lynn Robinson, Director General of the IIC. It's now time for live discussion, and it's my pleasure to introduce IIC Director Andrew Barons from Vodacom South Africa, who will tell you more about our distinguished panelists and who will share their experiences in Africa, Asia and the Middle East. Over to you, Andrew.
Good morning to everyone. That is South African time. I'm very honored and I'm very excited to moderate the session on narrowing the digital divide, and what an extraordinary context leading up to this panel discussion. And I'd like to just very briefly introduce the panel to you. We have Bokar Bar. He's the CEO from the Samina Telecommunications Council, and really is very active in the region of South Asia, Middle East, and North Africa. We are also very honored and privileged indeed to have Dr. Vagile, who is the chairman of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. And then we have Dr. Lucy Abrams, who's the director of the Link Center, the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. So different perspectives to this extraordinary theme and topic, and what a foundation, as I stated, that has been laid by our keynote speaker, by Pepper and by Michelle, as a very, very useful context. I'm going to invite Mr. Bokar Bar to provide and to present his opening remarks, after which I will then call on the other two panelists as well, before we go into a discussion and a chat on some of the content they've presented. So without much further ado, if I can hand over to you, Bokar, to make your opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good afternoon to all of you from Dubai. I would like first to thank IIC for this opportunity, and it's a privilege to be a part of this excellent panel of leaders. I think we have heard a lot this morning about the digital divide, and very quickly contextualizing first the digital divide is a necessity. You know, the notion of digital divide, and we've heard that this morning, is no longer about just being connected or not connected. It is far deeper than that. I believe it is both about being relative and relevant. Relative in the sense that we have to look at to what extent one population or group of people may be connected as compared to others. And relevant in the sense that are they using the internet access in a relevant, positive way such that it adds value to their life. So we really do have to look at things quite contextually, because broadband technology coverage exists for more than 90% of the world population. We've heard this excellent presentation made this morning by Bob Pepper from Facebook, and yet a significant part of the world has yet to benefit from this expansive technology presence. Having said this, it is true that the digital divide, in its general sense, has been growing rather than narrowing. And this has been strongly exposed during the pandemic of the last 18 months. Numbers speak for themselves. 3.7 billion people are not yet benefiting from access to meaningful connectivity, and especially when crisis strikes, being disconnected works against the greater aspirations of bringing a level playing field and broader social and economic relationships to the rest of the world. While it might seem hard to imagine during the pandemic, educational and work options facilitated by connectivity were reserved for only a minority of the global population. That's the harsh truth. The most critical challenge today is ensuring access, affordability, and the previous speaker were mentioning that, and equality to those who did not but could have benefited greatly over the past almost 2 years had they also had access to broadband that some did. With greater accessibility and more affordable digital communication services, connectivity can provide a foundation for greater equity among global societies and foster digital inclusion. A goal near and dear to many of us who have the privilege to contribute efforts to the work of the ITU, the UN Broadband Commission, among others. For the moment, Andrew, I will pause there. I just wanted to give the context of the digital divide. Thank you very much, and back to you.
So thank you for your opening comments. I'd just like to call upon Dr. Vagile, if I could invite you to make your opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and excellent speakers before this, Mr. Chapman and Mr. Michel. And I'm really privileged to be here. I congratulate International Institute of Communication for completing successful 50 years of service to the field of communication and having this 51st annual conference. I am having this opportunity, first opportunity to talk to on the IIC platform after I took over at the chairman tribe. And it is my pleasure to share my views on this very important subject, and that is narrowing digital divide, an issue to my heart. I did my PhD on tribals of India, and I dealt with social divide, and so I can understand this issue very well. And the pandemic actually exposed the digital divide as never before, as those with internet connectivity and access to the services were able to and are able to continue learning and working and may even have profited from it, while those excluded, which include the poor, the school-going children, their school-going children, students, workers, and working and self-employed women, they have lost out from the point of view of education, health, employment, and business. India is no exception. Here we had the same problem. And research shows that inequality of income and wealth may have further increased during the COVID. Coverage and connectivity are the main connectivity issues of digital service. But we need to realize that access and usage gap, which was rightly pointed out in the earlier, earlier speakers, is a major challenge. And as of January 2021, 3.7 billion remain offline globally, who are largely belong to the developing LDCs, low income and middle income groups. And beyond regional divide between the developed and underdeveloped countries, urban rural digital divide, as well as the poor rich divide and gender gap exist within the developing countries and India. For example, one of the studies showed that in India, only an average of 42.6% of women ever use internet, as against an average of 62% among the men. And this also figure is very low if we consider it with the other developed countries. This divide extends further to disadvantaged groups, which include tribals, excluded communities, differently abled persons, and LGBT community, which has been largely remained unattended. And if we leave this unaddressed, this divide will exacerbate existing income and wealth inequalities. I would like to make 4 important observations with regard to digital divide. First, every technological disruption, any new technological innovation, if the vulnerable sections are not attended from the point of view of updating their digital literacy, the type of devices and use cases and broadband capacity, the digital divide may further increase. Secondly, I would like to say that economy, when the economy is digitalized, the persons in the informal sector, especially women, will lose their market to the formal sector. third point I would like to make is that the operators and the stakeholders who are providing various services should, as part of that marketing strategy, should attend on the excluded, even if the rate of return is low or negligible. And last, the government can neglect this issue of digital divide at their own peril. And with this remarks, I would like to say that the task of closing the coverage and usage gaps is very complex. It involves major supply side challenges, notably extending broadband infrastructure into rural and remote areas, encouraging investment and competition, and upgrading networks to match the rising demand. Additionally, addressing demand side issues such as digital literacy, affordability in devices and connectivity, and relevant local content production of the service is also equally important. Lots of initiatives have been taken by government India to reduce this digital divide and to connect the unconnected in the last decade. Platforms like yours help us to learn from one another, and therefore I would like to share some of this initiative. The government has envisaged Connect India as one of the missions under National Digital Communication Policy of 2028, and which has the motto of a digital future for all. As part of this mission, government has launched a nationwide broadband connectivity project that is known as BharatNet to provide broadband connectivity to all the 600,000 plus villages across India by optimal mix of media like underground OFC, aerial OFC, radio and satellite. The outcomes are very, very encouraging. The second is that we are using the fund of universal service obligations for creation of telecom infrastructure in unconnected remote areas like islands, hill and forest areas. From the demand side, government has over the last 7 years worked to build a strong national digital foundation, which is accelerating the demand for services. For example, universal coverage of digital identity, which is known as Aadhaar in India, digital payment platforms, adoption of various open APIs, online delivery of various services, and direct benefit transfer to the targeted populations have helped create new digital use cases propelling the demand. I mentioned about BharatNet project. Using BharatNet fiber, common service centers have been established in villages for providing high quality, cost-effective digital content and services in the areas of e-governance, education, health, telemedicine, agriculture, rural banking, and insurance. Utility service, even e-land records are available online. Direct benefit transfer to targeted poor has been now possible. Government of India also has launched a new digital literacy campaign in which at least 1% from the 60 million rural households are to be covered. I'm very happy to state that 2/3 of the households are already covered. Government is also focusing on phased manufacturing program. After 2015, some 100 plus units manufacturing mobile handsets and components have emerged due to introduction of local manufacturing incentives. This has further lowered the prices of mobile devices, especially smartphones. To sum up, I would like to say that the regulators and policymakers need to opt for tools that can help mitigate the widening inequalities and power imbalance in the digital economy. This will require continuous review of existing policies, laws, and regulations so as to take care of people on the fringe. We need to formulate policies and light touch facilitating regulations to promote enterprise, investment, and innovation. Promoting affordable devices, affordable and good connectivity is the key. It goes without saying that imparting information and creating awareness about the various uses and benefits of digital services also crucial to bridge this digital divide. To this effect, capacity building is as much important as connecting the unconnected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vagile, for those opening comments. So far, we've heard the perspective of industry representatives. We've heard the perspective of a sector-specific regulator, and now we're going to hear from an academic as to how one would opening comments with regard to narrowing the digital divide. Dr. Abrams, if I can call upon you, thank you.
Good morning, greetings to the IIC and to all colleagues present. I want to take the perspective of communities in rural areas who experience the digital divide and who are very much aware that they are experiencing a digital divide. Most recently, I spent some time in a rural village in our Limpopo province in South Africa, where I spoke with a farmer who said, I wish I could just press a button and chemical sprays would be released so to manage the pests on the cabbages that I'm growing, because we are negatively affected by climate change. The weather is hotter in winter than it usually is, and we have this infestation of pests. We also have a project in another rural part of South Africa with teachers, secondary mathematics teachers, and they really want access to the internet so that they can use software to teach mathematics. And so what this says is that there is significant demand in rural areas. And it's not just some generic demand for bandwidth. People know what they want to do with the bandwidth if they could afford it. One more crucial point is that from this broader perspective of many communities, whether they're farming communities, educational communities, or young people not currently in education or in employment, they are very keen app developers. And so that is the reason why we've seen this mushrooming of what we call tech hubs. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the notion of tech hubs. Not only across the world, but on the African continent. There are currently upwards of 600 tech hubs on the African continent. And people are there, they're there from early in the morning until late in the evening, as far as is possible, under the COVID conditions and COVID protocols. But prior to COVID, these tech hubs have been real fonts of self-expression and of digital innovation, community-oriented digital innovation. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you very much for those opening comments to all the three panelists. We are doing very well for time, so I think it's perhaps the time now of the discussion to get into some of the details, some of what works in your region, what does not seem to work, how would one go about narrowing that divide, as it were. Bokar, I thought that I would start with you. If you recall the early days of reform, we had universal service for fixed, and then there was universal service for wireless. Now we seem to be having to look at a universally connected world. And Dr. Vergile was talking about how they're mobilizing the fund, for example, towards that goal. But I'm very interested to hear in your region, what solutions would you put forward, given your experience, and just what are the core elements of those that would achieve that universally connected world? Over to you, Bokar.
Thank you for the question, Andrew. Allow me first to reiterate that most critically, to overcome challenges associated with access, affordability, and equality, we need new financial resources. Knowing very well that connecting the remaining 46% of the world population still not connected is not at all easy. The connecting gaps are immense and need innovation, collaboration, cooperation, and commitment of a new level. This is a very timely moment to discuss the core elements required to achieve, as you have rightly mentioned, a universally connected world, coinciding with key recommendation now available and contained in the executive summary to the forthcoming report of the Broadband Commission Working Group on 21st Financing, Funding and Investment Models for Bridging Broadband Connectivity Gaps. The way we bring access to connectivity can no longer be devoid of perspective on how our world has changed, not only in the last 2 years, but also as a natural evolutionary process where change is the only constant. With changed market and socio-political and socio-economic realities, the investment, funding and financing model that enabled earlier ICT, infrastructure development, and brought telephony and later connectivity to us, and through which digital ecosystem came into being and which allowed for possibilities that citizens would have access to relevant content and digital service, are just no longer sufficient or even effective today. They were created for the market realities and economic perspective of the 20th century, whereas the issue of digital divide we are discussing is an issue of 21st century. Today, in the SAMINA region, which is South Asia, Middle East, and North Africa, and also in other regions, enterprise and government alike, as well as industry-related stakeholders, benefit from delivering services through broadband infrastructure. This is so because it was timely realized that businesses that built global digital platform will be even more central to an ever more data-driven digital economy. We heard the Prime Minister this morning during her opening remark. Given the global nature of the digital economy, it is imperative that there are global level responses to the connectivity gap to ensure that no one is left behind. Therefore, new approaches must reflect the changed characteristic of broadband that is no longer a luxury, but a general purpose technology, a basic human right, public good with utility character that the entire digitalized economy is benefiting from, requiring, of course, an objective-minded realignment of shared priorities and responsibility. Therefore, in our finding, and I'm referring to the Broadband Commission Working Group on 21st Century, we centered our effort on the question of how a wide spectrum of stakeholders within the digital space can unite to tackle the challenge of developing new broadband infrastructure, upgrading existing infrastructure, and cultivating relevant digital content and services for widely unconnected population, and contribute at the same time in a sustainable and predictable way. And then we came up with 4 core, all-inclusive, multifaceted foundational elements that we believe hold the answer to materializing a universally connected world. The first recommendation that we have issued is broadening the base of contributors to ensure that all that participate in and benefit from the digital economy and its broadband infrastructure can contribute to it. We need to have a broader base of contributors. That's number 1. Number 2, earmarking proceeds from the ICT sector participant to be spent on initiatives supporting broadband connectivity and adoption goals. And that should include the proceeds from existing mandatory contributions, fees, regulatory levies, or digital taxes. The third recommendation is reforming the Universal Service and Access Fund, where they have been found to be ineffective, with a focus on new incremental infrastructure deployment and demand supporting initiatives aimed at securing affordable connectivity to many, as well as recognizing various types of contribution from the broader base of stakeholders, as we have identified on the first recommendation. And the last recommendation is the creation of an international fund to support the sustainable development of broadband, which could be hosted by an existing institution, international or multilateral development bank, in coordination, and coordination is important, we heard Berek, with the relevant UN organization. This fund would be open to investors and non-governmental organizations that could make voluntary contribution for the provision of low capital cost, long amortization period financing. These strategic recommendations are pillars that should act as a foundation for driving a universally connected world and corroborate a growing narrative around connectivity, one that emphasizes the shared benefits we all enjoy, our collective responsibility, the commitment required, the reform we must timely initiate, and the opportunity to enable global connectivity and digital economy growth for all. So these are, to summarize, the 4 recommendations that the Broadband Commission has approved and initiated, and I believe that will be the beginning of the conversation that we will be conducting with most of the concerned stakeholders in the value chain. Back to you, and thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bokar, for those specific recommendations. I was just wondering, Dr. Vagile, you've shared the various steps taken by India to bridge the digital divide. I was just wondering the extent to which some of those initiatives that you've alluded to, how have they helped India in broadening its digital adoption? Perhaps if you could just elaborate on how it has helped India with broadening the adoption. Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting question. Actually, earlier I mentioned about the kind of initiatives which we have taken. India went for 4G in 2016, middle of the 2016. After that, there has been a tremendous growth in the use of broadband and mobile, and helped us in reducing the digital divide. That does not mean that we should be complacent. There is a huge work to be done, especially with regard to rural areas and those communities and groups which are still excluded. But I would like to tell that internet subscribers in India has increased more than 3 times between 2014 and 2020. They were 238 million in 2014, and now they are 776 million. This is one thing I would like to say. Then during the same period, rural internet subscribers have increased more than, again, 3 times, from just 92 million to now 302 million. What is heartening is that the growth in rural internet subscriber has been much higher than that of the urban subscribers. Third thing which I would like to point out is that annual per capita data usage has increased from 3 GB in 2014 to 90 GB, a whopping 30 times increase in users, data usage. Fifth thing which I would like to tell, the indicators of deepening and penetrating the broadband services, is the telecommunication tariffs in India are one of the lowest in the world. The data tariffs have fallen from around $4 per GB in 2014 to just 20 cents in 2020. This is the way below the global average cost of $8.53 per GB. That is what I would like to say. One more thing is the improved connectivity and access have helped in financial inclusion. This is very important. Aided by digital identity and mobile penetration, National Mission for Financial Inclusion was rolled out in 2014 itself. In March 2021, 420 2 million bank accounts have been opened, largely of the women and those who are those who are from the those who are poor. More importantly, women accounts, almost 55% of these accounts. This has also helped the government to directly transfer the subsidies and the funds to the targeted population. Bridging of digital divide is further helping in introduction of new concepts and services like DigiLocker, which is a secure cloud-based platform for storage, sharing, and verification of documents and certificates. This has helped a lot for the common citizen to avail various benefits and to take the various loans from the government without handling the physical documents. Similarly, e-rupee service, which have been recently launched, is a cashless and contactless government subsidy voucher-based digital payment system that has been found favor among the older age group and poor, and this can be used even with the feature phones. So in COVID times, this has become very, very popular. So these are the things which I would like to say that this has actually helped India to bridge the digital divide. Thank you.
So thank you very much for that. Lucy, I was just wondering, you should be encouraged by the Indian experience. There seems to be more growth in rural than in urban. And some of the initiatives have been specifically directed towards narrowing the gap in rural. Now, I guess the question to you is, how have the various parties in South Africa, Southern Africa, how have they gone about addressing this intransigent nature of the digital divide, given what you've now heard from India, and given the recommendations that BOCOR has made with regard to the new financial resources? So just perhaps your comments in that regard?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. Yes, I would say that the history of the application of universal service and access funds has not been a shining light. We have seen limited value generated from the, and I agree completely, what are now very old-fashioned approaches, structures and arrangements for universal service funds. Very bureaucratic, looking largely at very basic infrastructure and not really being able to keep pace with the rapid advance in the nature of broadband, particularly mobile broadband. On the other hand, in communities, in organizations, to some extent in schools, we are seeing the availability of Wi-Fi in schools, but the quality, the bandwidth is very weak. And so even though there may be Wi-Fi available in schools, in certain classrooms, for example, but the quality of the bandwidth doesn't enable teaching using dynamic software with lots of visual images and so on. What we see is a disjuncture, I would say, between telecommunications policy on the one hand and innovation policy on the other hand. And what that means is that the telecoms policy tends to look primarily at infrastructure, although it is now beginning to look at digital skills. So for example, South Africa recently adopted in August 2020, adopted a national digital and future skills strategy. And I want to emphasize the future skills aspect, because digital skills alone are not enough to close that digital divide. Infrastructure alone is not enough. We need this combination of digital skills, problem-solving skills, communication skills, technical skills, skills to work with the technology. Let me give a very practical example that when the Wi-Fi is put into the school environment, we don't say, okay, everybody, for the next 2 hours, let us go and observe the technicians setting up the Wi-Fi. Let us understand it. Maybe there will be young people, girls and boys, from amongst the learners who would be very interested in becoming technicians and network engineers. But we have a very narrow thinking. We kind of stuck in the 20th century. This is the Universal Fund. This is the Universal Service Agency. And perhaps the last point, extending the application of funding to tech hubs. This is something that is written into the National Digital and Future Skills Strategy for South Africa. We'll have to see how it pans out. But these are environments where people are building knowledge and innovation themselves. They're not government-supported entities, but some input, some funding input into those contexts allows telecommunications policy and innovation policy to begin to converge. Maybe first in reality and then in writing, because sometimes innovation happens in reality and then we have to confirm it in our formal policy making. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Lucy. I was just going back to Dr. Vagile. It was something you were saying earlier, and I just thought whether you could elaborate. I was just listening to the statistics, and it is astonishing when one thinks of the scale and scope of what is being undertaken in India. I was just comparing it to South Africa, for example. 100 million mobile connections in South Africa. The number I have here is 1.2 billion in India. Smartphone users, 54 million in South Africa. I have here just under 800 million in India. So it is astonishing if one thinks of the scale and scope. And Dr. Vagile, was just wondering, how have emerging technologies contributed to bridging that digital divide in India? Are you able to comment on that?
Thank you very much for asking this question. And let me, admit that, before 2016, India was, when it came to digital communication, was not an inspiring case at all. In 2016, the radical introduction of 4G by one of the new operators, changed it all. All other operators were also forced to go for 4G. These actually, you will be surprised to know that in India, voice call is now free. Nobody charges anything for the voice call. And, data is only 20 cents per GB. The data usage is almost, 12 GB, per person. So that is what has happened. And my understanding is that 4G has helped the digital communication to reach to the poor. The hawkers, the artisan women, the farmers, the fishermen, small people, they are able to use the phones and they are able to communicate. And in government of India, what they have done is, using this technology, 4G technology, they have created a lot of platforms. One platform is Digital India. This platform provides you all the information about various e-services which are being given by the various ministries and by the various government, including local governments also. So what, and this also has helped us to reach out to the people in form of, delivery of services which are online. I mentioned about that. So, see, when it comes to the problem with the new technology is only one, that if we are not very careful about devising our policies so as to ensure that the digital exclusion does not increase. Generally, what happens? New technology requires new skills. New technology requires new kind of devices. And new technology also requires higher connectivity. By and large, I am telling this. And the problem with the excluded, socially excluded people, and I would like to, I don't just say rural and urban divide, and I would not just talk about gender gap. there are specific groups, like for example, disabled groups, LGBT, communities. There are tribes, there are communities, which are excluded, traditionally. So these are the people, who cannot handle all this kind of, change of technology or disruption of technology. So I think continued upgradation of the skills and digital literacy is one of the important thing. And our authority has now recommended that government, we have digital literacy mission in which, all the 6 million households are to be, at least one person is to be made digitally literate. We say that, this literacy has to be continued whenever something new comes. 5G coming up, for example. So 5G will, throw up a lot of use cases. And now those who are vulnerable and those who are just now entered the, digital communication era, and if they are not handled properly, they will be left out. And as I mentioned, as the economy will be digitalized, the first victim will be those who are digitally excluded and those who are socially excluded. As the physical economy will get converted into digital economy, the informal economy will get formalized, and the women artisans, the people who are small farmers, those who are in informal sector, they suffer a lot. So I would say technology is a double-edged sword. We have to handle it, but we have to use it so that the services become cheaper, the services become user-friendly, and actually we can reach out to the people who are at the bottom. This is what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I will be doing a round of concluding remarks from each of the panelists, but just before I do, Lucy, one of the questions that form part of this panel is, how does one optimize the policy and the regulatory institutions to break this persistence in rural and urban digital divide? And I was wondering, given your experience now across SATDEC, the African Union, as it were, what policy and or regulatory approaches are needed, you think, in this in this current decade?
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. I've said a little bit about policy, so let me come to the issue of regulation. I think that on the African continent, more broadly in the SADC region and South Africa in particular, the focus of regulation, communication sector regulation, has been very much on licensing, competition, pricing, to a limited extent on universal access and service. But what has been missing in the last 20 years is that very important balance that we're told by so many researchers and theorists who have studied the communication, the broad communications, telecommunications and broadcasting environment, namely that the role of the regulator is to balance the interests of the operators, the consumer, and public policy in such a way that the regulator pays attention also to the dynamic relationship between competition and innovation. We have not seen a strong enough push on the African continent for competition, whereas we know that the TRAI has invested many decades in pushing the boundaries of competition. And as we've just heard, in reducing prices to virtually nothing or actually nothing. And yet, there is still a market for operators. There is still revenue to be made at other layers of communications usage. So that kind of innovative thinking, I think, is where the South African regulator, SADC regulators, African regulators need to go next. Very few African regulators, if any, have a research division established within the regulator, while many of the units of the regulator engage in some form of research. It is not really the kind of research that unlocks solutions to these long-term problems. There's a very limited culture of research practice. And when I say research practice, I don't mean academic research practice. I mean regulatory research such as that is being conducted by the TRAI, Ofcom, where these difficult questions are studied, papers are released, there's public discussion about them, we mull over the solutions, and we find solutions, and we adopt solutions. One regulator recently, the Communications Authority of Kenya, established a research division. Currently, there are only 2 staff in that research division. And they are really just beginning to engage in the practice of regulatory research, formalized, well-articulated regulatory research. But that's a very recent phenomenon. And I think something that regulators need to take on much more significantly. And as I say, one of the key agenda items is the need to understand that dynamic relationship between creating environments that allow for innovation, in infrastructure provision, for example, licensing community Wi-Fi networks, for example. We can do a lot more of that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy, for that contribution. We are going to start descending so we can land the plane safely. I'm going to call upon Bokar just to present his final words so we can really just capture the essence of your intervention today. So Bokar, over to you.
Well, we have said many things this morning. I believe from my standpoint, representing the private sector, if there is any takeaway, I think I would say unlocking access to capital is the key to tackle lots of issues and challenges, ranging, as we have heard this morning, all the experts, ranging from affordability, skill development, which is extremely important, that will foster also job creation, to ensuring digital inclusiveness, to making future network resilient. So I am combining here the hard factor for digital development and the soft factor. However, stakeholders need, and I mean from the private sector perspective, needs to be incentivized to contribute, and this requires a better understanding of their differences and objective. Referring to unlocking access to capital again, we have investing, we have funding, and we have financing. And for these 3 mechanisms, we have different stakeholders. Ours is a complex industry of increasingly advancing digital communication technology and enablement pillars. At each tier, we need to be mindful of the role that this industry plays in the advancement of the society and other industries. Thus, we need to address its numerous internal challenges, ranging from taxation and high fees to timely making resources available to the private sector, to make it possible for operators to smoothly move data across borders. This is a huge challenge. In Africa, we talk about one network. That's important in that regard. To also devising policies and regulatory approaches that are business conducive and are driven by the principle of collaborative regulation. As everybody knows here, the digital economy is about the inclusiveness of all the other industries through the ICT platforms. Therefore, a new culture of collaboration in the 5G era is the necessity we must fulfill to meet our collective objective of filling the connectivity gap, infrastructure gap, communication gap, and stakeholder priority gaps. With that, I think we are short in time. I would like to thank you, Andrew, for this privileged opportunity to be a part of this panel today. Thank you, and back to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Bokar. I'm just going to call upon Dr. Vagile for his concluding comments.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Luciana, for appreciating the work of the TRI. But TRI from the very beginning has two principles. Principle number one, we will follow the principle of forbearance, allow the competitions in full-fledged competition, allow new operators to enter the market easily, and there should not be any restriction whatsoever. That was one thing. And secondly, allow new technologies also to flourish. For example, India was one of the few countries which made spectrum technology neutral, and that actually allowed us to move very fast when it came to 4G. Now in 5G also, this principle, and now most of the countries have started doing that. Second issue, we are very, very careful about quality of service. We are very stringent quality of service standards, and we are very, we are using the technology to measure the standards. And then if any operator, if he flouts those standards, then there is a punitive action. So that also is helping us a lot. Much more than that, the rural urban digital divide. I would like to tell one example about BharatNet. What we are doing in this is that it is one of the world's largest rural broadband connectivity program for the rural and remote areas. The problem is that the operators, they don't go to the rural areas, they don't go to the hilly areas, and they don't go to the the forest area because of the cost consideration, because it's not viable for them. So India start implementing this project, and this project has the target of putting 1.2 million kilometers of optical fibers, and will connect 640,000 plus villages through optical fibers and affordable broadband services to citizens and various institutions, including schools, health centers, local governments, and civic centers. Further, the connected villages are to have the last mile connectivity through Wi-Fi hotspots. A network of common service centers in villages provides e-governance, e-health, e-education, e-banking, internet, and other services. More than of the total of 1.2 million kilometers of optical fiber, we have already laid 548,000 kilometers of fiber, and 400,000 villages are covered. That means 2/3 of the villages are covered under the project. We have put up 250,000 civic centers in the country, and these civic centers are, as I mentioned, is providing all the services. That also helped us to open the bank account for all the village, all the women and the men, so they can open the bank account, and they can directly make the payment, and they can receive the subsidies and the grants of the government of India directly. That has also reduced the huge corruption which was there in giving the benefits. So direct benefit transfer is becoming a boon for the poor. This is what I would like to say. So, and recently we have come up with another very, very radical and innovative and interoperable Wi-Fi access network interface. It's called Vani framework. It is, it is again, this earlier BharatNet, it was proposed by us to reduce the digital divide. Again, this Wi-Fi access network interface, the concept and the framework was conceptualized and recommended by TRI. And it provided installation of public Wi-Fi hotspots by private entities known as public data aggregator on similar lines of PCOs. The potential user who wants to access broadband through public Wi-Fi will need to download the relevant application. There are a lot of applications provided in the country, and they get authenticated, and thereafter access broadband at any public Wi-Fi hotspots. So today, wherever there is no connectivity, and there is no broadband connectivity, this Wi-Fi are going to be very, very useful. So, so this is another project which we have taken. What my take is that, and I agree that only we should not look at licensing, competition, and pricing. The regulatory authorities' mandate is much more. They are supposed to look after the consumers, and especially the consumers who are excluded. Who are socially excluded, and they are getting digitally excluded, and more so about the women. Who spends most of their time in the domestic work, and as well as they go to the the factories, and they go to the field to work. So the women who they require help. They require they require that they also have access to the market, mostly labor market, and as well as the market for their produce, which they collect, or they manufacture, or they make. So this is what I would like to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We've come to the end of our session, Lucy, unfortunately. So thank you very much for everyone for their contribution, for this very, very stimulating session building on the early introductory comments.